this video, I'm going to be teaching you how to draw a three-dimensional candy cane with a little bit of a shadow on it. It's a lot easier than it looks. Actually, I think the hardest part is drawing the candy cane shape, and the rest of it is just paying attention to your shading so that we have highlights and shadows to make it look three-dimensional. So, to draw the candy cane part, this is the part where you want to go the slowest, and definitely ask for help before you start shading. So, you can do it right side up, or if it's easier for you, you could draw it as a J first, because that's a shape you're familiar with. So maybe I'll do it that way so we can watch. You should always, when you're sketching something out, draw as lightly as you can. I'm going to press a little harder so you can see what I'm doing. Let's see if that shows up. Can you see that? I'm going to press a little harder. So I like to make things look diagonal sometimes. I just think that is more interesting on a straight up and down paper if things cut across diagonally, but you can really do this however you want. So what you're going to do first is you're going to very lightly just draw yourself out a J shape, and you're going to try to make the arc of that J as even as you can. So you can see this first arc of my J, I think, curled in a little too much. And you want this to be almost like a half circle, so you want to make sure it's a nice, even, kind of round arc. But that's why we're drawing lightly, is you can erase those. You can wait and erase them when you're done, but if they're super distracting, you can absolutely erase them as you go. Now, then you just want to decide to make this, have the thickness, which way you want to curve out. So if you have room to curve out or curve in, for this one I think I have more room if I curve in. So I'm going to curve in, and I'm going to pay attention to how thick this is. And once I have that thickness, I'm going to go a lot slower, and I'm just going to make sure that I'm kind of turning and curving so that I can follow my original line and stay that same distance away the whole time. It's a lot easier said than done, so take your time. Try not to make a gazillion little lines. Some people get a little too sketchy when they do this, but try and keep your hand just steady and watch what it's doing. And if you got to pick up and start over, that's okay. Okay, so I'm at the end. So what I'm going to do now is I want to turn it right side up, because I just feel like I can recognize the candy cane shape better now that it's right side up. Once I get to the end, I'm going to look at it, and I'm going to make sure it's as long as I want it to be, especially compared to how thick it is. We don't want it to be like too short and fat so it doesn't make sense, but we don't want it too long and skinny either. So I'm kind of looking at that thickness. I think it looks pretty good. So then when I get to the end, I'm just kind of doing a U shape to close them together. Okay? Once you're done, take a look. I feel like this is kind of at a funny angle, so I'm going to straighten this out a little bit. Always look at your work and ask yourself if it looks right, and if it doesn't, try and figure out why. And if you can't figure out why, ask a neighbor, ask me. But there we go. Okay, so now you have your candy cane shape. Erase any lines that you don't want to keep, and then we're going to work on doing the stripes to the candy cane. Okay, so all you really want to focus on for this, also to make it look round, is you don't want them to be perfectly straight and diagonal. You kind of want them to be like little arcs. See how it's kind of curved a little bit? So I'm going to draw one line, space it out, and draw another one. Try and pay attention to that spacing, and just keep continuing with these kind of slightly curved lines. Again, it's one of those things, it's easier said than done. So go slow, watch yourself, draw lightly. You're going to make mistakes inevitably, so the sooner you can catch them, the easier it is to fix. You don't want to make a big mistake and then get to the end and have to fix everything. Okay, when you get to the curve, it does get a little funky, because now you're kind of curving around, and it's going to kind of start to change direction. See, now I'm curving over and down. Okay? Again, once you're done, take a look. It's going to be pretty much impossible without measuring to make these completely even, but if they look fairly even, then you're good to go. Okay, now this is optional. I pressed harder for the video so you could see, but one thing I like to do whenever I'm doing something that I want to look realistic and I'm shading is once I draw my pencil lines out, I like to erase them as much as I can. I still want to be able to see them so that I can shade inside my lines, but I don't want them to stand out as pencil lines anymore, because anything that's real doesn't have these kind of pencil lines around it. In real life, we're not walking around with outlines. We're going to add shading to give us our outlines. So what I'm doing is I'm really lightly, I'm barely pressing with my eraser. I'm just lightly going over all of this so that I have this sort of shadow, like this ghost of my drawing left. Okay? Wipe it off if you need to. All right, here comes the fun part, the shading. Okay, make sure this is in focus. So I like to do red first because that I can see the best. So hopefully you can still see my lines a little bit in this video. And you can start red or white on the bottom. It doesn't really matter. So pick, which section you want, the very bottom or the first one up. And what I would actually like you to do before you start on your paper is to get yourself a piece of scrap paper and practice this a few times. You could do it on the back, but you might leave marks. And I have tons of scrap paper under my table. Is practice with your hand, pressing real hard, and practice slowly moving your hand out and pressing lighter and lighter as you move your hand out. And it creates what's called a gradient. Okay, so that's a gentle fade from light to dark. You should practice that a few times. If you move too fast, then you end up having gaps in your lines. If you change your pressure too much, then it's not a slow fade, it's kind of a jump. So you're practicing doing a really slow movement with your hand and a slow let up on your pressure. So you can practice doing this nice fade from light to dark. Do it a few times because it'll create like a muscle memory. So you know how to do it without having to think about it too much. Once you feel like you got the idea, you're going to go back to your drawing, pick your section you're going to work in, and you're going to do that fade. So we're going to press really hard on the edge. You can actually just start with an outline if that makes it easier. Both sides within that little stripe I created, and I'm going to fade it, staying inside my outlines. And by the time I get to the middle, I actually want that red color to disappear. Once I feel like I've got it, if you're not sure, have it fade out faster. You can always add more, but you can't take it away. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Red, I'm getting lighter, 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 and I'm leaving the center kind of empty. Okay. And try to color the same direction all the time, but if you need to get into a little corner, you can kind of change direction for that. Skip one, go to your next one. Dark outline, stay inside that section, fade it. If you're nervous, make sure you fade faster rather than slower. Leave the middle empty. Okay. And I love this because you only have to be a few in before you start to see it almost look like a shine that's running up the middle of the candy cane. It's got a highlight where the light hits it and bounces off. So most 3D objects, the part where they stick out the most, because this is a round, kind of goes up and around candy cane, the part that sticks out the most usually has that highlight where it's shiny. So that's what we're creating right now, is that shiny highlight where the light's hitting the top of the candy cane. Make sure you're always skipping one. Slow and steady. Biggest mistakes I see with students in art is that they try to go too fast. So make sure before you put that pencil down or make a mark that you're where you want to be. Okay. And the other advice is just fade it quick. You can always go back and add more red if you didn't add enough. But like I said before, if it's on there, you're kind of stuck with it. You can sort of erase it, but it's hard to get rid of. Now, here we're into the curve, so it's easier. Turn your paper so that you can continue shading in the manner you're used to, like I'm used to shading up and down. So I'm turning my paper so I can continue going up and down. Still fading in. By the time I get to the middle, I want that red to disappear. You can always go back and darken things. Okay. Turn it again. Okay, if at any point in this video you need to redo something, you can always stop, rewind, pause. That's why I like to do these instead of doing demonstrations live, is you can all learn at your own pace. So don't feel like you have to work at the same pace as your neighbor. Work at your own pace. Okay, so my reds are done for now. I might go back and touch them up, but they're done for now. Now the next part might seem odd to you. I'm also going to shade the white section, but I'm actually not going to start with white. I'm actually going to use a light blue. Blue is a cool color, so when you use blue, it gives the feeling of cold, and it actually, I feel like, makes this candy cane look more pepperminty. You could also use gray, but gray is very dull, and I think blue is a better cold-looking color that works for this. But we're going to use it very, very sparingly, which means not a lot. So I'm doing the same process, but I'm fading a whole lot faster, and I'm really keeping the blue mostly just to the edge. So I'm not pressing hard on the edge like I did with the red. I'm pressing light, and then if I move it in, and when I move it in, I'm doing it a lot lighter and not really bringing it in quite as far. Okay? Really nice and soft. I know it might be hard to see in this video, but the good thing about this is this step is much faster because you're not coloring nearly as much. Okay. So just a little bit on the edge, bring it in a tiny bit. And if you're not comfortable starting right in with this, definitely go to that scrap sheet of paper and practice. But I am barely pressing. And if you press too hard, that's okay. It's not a bad thing. We just don't need it to look like blue. We're just adding kind of like this little minty, cool colored shadow. And if it's hard to see the outline, that's okay, because we're going to add a cast shadow on the table. A cast shadow is a shadow that falls onto the surface, and that's going to help define the edge of our candy cane. Okay, again, turn your paper if you need to. Much quicker this time around. And then for the tops and the bottoms, you can kind of go all the way around that U shape. Okay, so it's starting to look three-dimensional. I'll lift this up so you can see it a little closer. What we've got now, we've kind of got this line of a highlight running up. Now, I'm going to add more white to make the white of the candy cane part really kind of stick out. So I can press pretty hard. Now this is kind of opposite. I'm pressing hard in the middle, and as I go to the edge, I'm lightening up. So it's the same idea as before. We're just kind of working the other way. So dark, and then bringing it out to the edge. Dark, bringing it up to the edge. We are going to add a little bit of white highlight inside the red also, but I like to do it one section at a time so I don't kind of carry over my colors and have them mix by accident. Okay, I like to always keep my shading up and down, which follows the shape of the candy cane. Okay, darker in the middle, lighter on the edges. You can overlap the blue a little bit, that's not a bad thing, but just like with everything else I've said, it's better to do a light and have a soft hand at first than to do too much and then be stuck and not be able to take it away. So nice and hard in the middle, lighter to the edges. See, my candy cane's really starting to look nice in 3D now. I mean, this may be something you've done before, possibly in a past art assignment. So if you have done it before, then this is just a great challenge for you to do better than you did last time. Whenever I draw something, I usually draw multiple, many times, so I can get as best I can at it as possible. Just like any sport, you don't throw a ball once and say, okay, I'm an expert at throwing a ball. You practice a million times. Okay, so I've got all my white sections now. I'm going to go in, and I'm not going to press quite as hard in those red sections, but I am going to add a little white just for the shine of the highlight in the middle. So it's not completely empty, because we did fade our red to be fairly empty in the middle. And we don't want it to look like there's nothing in that section. We just want to add a little red or white on top of the red, so it looks like a highlight. Okay, and if you feel like the white takes over and it's a little too much, or if the red's starting to look pink, that's where you can just go back in with your red and layer. The best drawings have multiple layers. They're usually not just like one coat and then done. Okay. So, any good artists, once they feel like they've put in all the parts, they kind of look and check, see if there's anything they can edit or clean up, any coloring that was a little sloppy or areas they may have missed, things they can darken. So I always like to go through one quick time, and you guys should do this also. See if you have any gaps between your stripes. That's where it tends to happen a lot, is like between the stripes you stop because you don't want to go in the other section, but then you have a little gap in your shading, an area you missed. Okay, hit everything one more time. Now we could take this even one step further and add shadows onto our red, but this is our goal, is to make this like a one-class drawing. So we'll keep it simple. All right, now our final step, like I mentioned earlier, is the cast shadow. So anytime you have an object on the table, I don't know if you can see it, depending on where the light is, you'll have a little shadow. So you can kind of see it underneath there. It's a very kind of thin gray line where the object blocks the light. So I always like to, if I'm making a drawing up from my head like I am here, I'm not looking at a candy cane, then I can choose where I want my shadow to go. So I'm going to pretend like my light is up here to the left, so my shadow will be to the right. So what I'm going to start doing, just to begin, is I'm going to very carefully create a dark outline on the right side of my candy cane. So it's right up against the edge, trying not to overlap the body of the candy cane. I'm sort of just outlining the edge, but I'm not taking out too far yet. Okay. Sometimes I like to do a lot of little lines, but you don't want it to be like scratching a broken million little lines. So you can definitely make it one steady line. Just keep an eye on where your hand's moving. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to curl that right about halfway up underneath that cane part. Okay. Because once I go over to this side, this is now the left side of this piece of the candy cane. The light would hit it. There's not going to be a shadow there. So we're actually going to jump the shadow over to the right side of this cane. Right about where we left off is where we pick up. And again, curl it under. So that's step one, is we just did this little bit of outline. Step two is the same thing we've been doing with this shading. Now I'm going to press a whole lot lighter, and I'm just going to kind of fuzz out this shadow. So moving over a little bit to the right, but I'm pressing a whole lot lighter. Very, very lightly. I almost have no pressure on this, and that creates kind of like the fuzzed out edge of the shadow. Shadows are always darkest right up underneath the object, and then if they are long shadows, they tend to get fuzzy and faded towards the edge. So you don't want to carry out too far. Okay. The only time you have long shadows are one, if this was a very tall object, which it's not. Candy canes are, only about that thick. So if it was tall, it could have a long shadow, or if the light was like a flashlight right up here against it, then it would create a longer shadow. But a realistic scenario, that's not really going to happen with the lighting. So nice and light. Don't forget to do on that other section. Really, really light. Very soft. That's definitely something that needs to be practiced for beginner artists, is having that nice soft hand. A trick for that is don't hold your pencil too tight. If you hold it tight, you tend to press hard. So if you hold your pencil loose, you can't push very hard with it because it would push right out of your hand. Okay. There is my candy cane. So if you have some spare time, go back through. You can, build up your shadow a little more, clean up your colors. But I hope you're happy with the results.